So a little bit of intro first. So Next Billion, we are a social enterprise, and we build data platforms and insights, helping companies and organizations expand specifically in high-growth emerging markets. We are based here at Level 3, and we've been working in about 10 countries since 2013. So what I'd like to talk to you about tonight is just kind of one of the projects that we've been doing in Thailand. And then, of course, we can talk later about some of the other stuff. And clicking. Okay, cool. So kind of there's a general thesis behind our work and a lot of the work with Unilever and Microsoft that kind of aligns pretty nicely for the subject of AI for good. And it's basically, can be summarized where we know that companies need data and they're willing to pay a lot of money for it. And we know that there's not really many solutions to access this information, especially in last mile communities. But at the same time, there's a lot of people in those communities and a lot of NGOs that serve those communities who could potentially be collecting it on the ground and potentially even sharing in the value of the data that's being generated in the world. So what we're trying to do is unlock the data that's being kind of demanded by companies and use that, that monetized information as a way to increase sustainable livelihoods around the world, basically increasing people's incomes by collecting data. So then this sort of feeds into this general idea of AI for good. So one of the good places to start is saying, what is it? And I think it's important to draw a distinction between good AI and AI for good. And to be really lazy about it, admittedly, we often define AI for good as anything that directly addresses a United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. Not just kind of because it does in the course of doing your business, but we're talking about technology or AI that is specifically designed to achieve an SDG. So sort of a theoretical point, but I think helpful for framing our definitions of, is a logistics company helping to solve traffic problems, or is that just sort of like an outcome of its work? And it helps us frame for later in this conversation. And a good use case of that is our project in Thailand. So I want to give you a little bit of context for it first. So Thailand and the Thai Ministry of Public Health has a project called Project HAS, which stands for Healthy, Accessible, and Safe. And believe it or not, every year they survey over 100,000 toilets. And they do those surveys having about 2,000 people conduct pen and paper surveys going into a variety of different public toilets, marking down on their list what is clean, what is dirty. All of that information is then transcribed into a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet is then passed into their manager's spreadsheet. And before you know it, all of this toilet data is a little crappy. Oh, got it. All right, cool. So what I wanted to do is kind of show you an example of how this project worked using a quick video that we've generated. And then right after that, hopefully walk you through kind of the components of how we went and started to solve this challenge together.
จุดที่สกปรกมากๆเลยก็คือโถที่นั่งนะคะจริงๆแล้วเนี่ยโรคที่อาจจะเกิดขึ้นนะคะจากการที่ใช้ส้วมไม่ถูกสุขลักษณะตรงนี้เนี่ยส่วนใหญ่น่าจะเป็นโรคระบบทางเดินอาหารอาจจะมีเชื้อบิดเชื้อไทฟอยด์ต่างๆ
We provide our mobile data collection application to government staff, NGO members, or local micro-entrepreneurs to capture information. These data collectors visit public restrooms and document sanitation ratings based on standard government indicators. In just a short initial program, we captured more than 11,000 photos of restroom hygiene in multiple provinces. We then used these photos to train a sanitation image recognition model to identify the conditions of important restroom features, like accessibility guardrails, door locks, toilet seats, and flooded floors. This data is aggregated and displayed to health administrators to understand local sanitation trends, and can also notify restroom operators to fix issues when poor conditions are observed. This digitally transforms auditing processes, provides greater accuracy, and expedites data processing.
So that guy in the video could explain it way better than I can, so it was important that you see it on video. But so I thought it would be helpful to kind of actually see people in practice doing what they were doing, and now to kind of walk through what was involved. So, you know, in the description that I gave in kind of the picture of what you see in the video, there's a couple big themes that we think that we can help with. First off, we think that, you know, with the data collection processes that the Thai government was collecting before, and also shared by a lot of other governments around the world, that there's clearly a need for digital transformation of data collection services, especially in emerging markets. Secondly, as I mentioned, there's probably an opportunity to kind of cut people in to this process. So rather than having kind of large multinational agencies go out and do projects one at a time, maybe there's an opportunity to leverage people and grassroots individuals to actually collect and share the value that's being generated. And then, of course, if you are capturing this kind of information, you don't want to just shove it in a PowerPoint report, but maybe you can use this to actually generate your own AI models, or at least some type of model that can help deliver public good. So in this case, by providing a mobile data collection app to individuals identified by NGOs, we were able to take photos of all of these restrooms in more of a crowdsourced type of manner, or at least kind of giving an example of what a crowdsourced manner would look like at scale. And we found that it was pretty easy to get someone to just to go into a bathroom, snap a few photos, and answer a few single choice, multiple choice questions. Then in the course of accessing and reviewing all their data, we were then able to create a basic image recognition model where we took a few thousand of the total 11,000 photos collected and trained a computer vision model on Azure to identify about 20 observational restroom features. You know, admittedly, we're not going to be able to tell you about the bacteria on the toilet, things that are not clear to the eyes, but things that are more to like the accessibility of a restroom. And that would be things like accessibility guardrails, soap dispensers, locks on doors, so on and so forth. And over time, we were able to build up an image recognition model that, you know, if you then submitted any photo of any toilet, it would then compare against our model and had about a 90% accuracy towards the end of our program together. Then all of this information could be made available to local administrators. And those local administrators could now view the sanitation conditions or trends in local communities over time and much faster than if they were to do so with pen and paper analysis once a year. And as we open this platform up in the future, more and more kind of roadmap features of what do you do with that information once it's collected, I can talk about in a moment. So now you might be asking, like, okay, that's all well and good, but how does this thing scale? How do you scale photos of toilets? And what we actually found was that by working through the Foundry, there was some clear partnerships and aligned interests that emerge when you're working in the toilet and sanitation space, namely with Domestos, otherwise known as Domex or Vim, which is a toilet bowl cleaner brand. Obviously has a very large interest in making sure that toilets are clean and that communities that use toilets are safe. So together we launched a program providing this technology stack to a similar field team in Vietnam focused on improving school sanitation. That program ran for a couple months towards the end of last year, was pretty successful, and now we're scaling it with the Domestos team further in Vietnam, as well as in South Africa, Turkey, and Poland. So really good example of, you know, how do we just start something small and efficient and start to scale and scale with partners with aligned interests. And there's a couple of technologies that I want to share that made this possible. So first off, using Azure, not just to give a shout out to the Microsoft folks in the room, but this was a really helpful tool for us as a small company to build on because we knew it was secure and we knew that a lot of our partners, like the government, like schools, wanted to know that data is secure when it's collected. So this kind of helped us check a really big box right away. Second off, being scalable helped us shift between countries fairly quickly rather than needing to kind of redeploy new instances, redevelop new teams, or set up new teams. And then also, a lot of the stuff that we were building, we really didn't know how to do it when we started. And having like live humans that we can call and say, hey, how does this work? Can you show me how this works? And not just be like on a customer support hotline was pretty helpful. So thanks, guys. And then as we shift more into the future, another big technology that we're leveraging in this course of making data available is Ocean Protocol, which some of you may be familiar with. It's also fairly new, but it's basically a blockchain-enabled protocol that allows anyone to unlock value from their data. Basically, kind of a similar hypothesis that companies have a lot of data, but often don't have good ways to get that in the hands of people who are trying to build creative models that change the world. And likewise, a lot of startups and smaller companies often have great teams, great algorithms, but don't have the same types of data sets that multinationals would have if you're an FMCG company, auto company, whatever it might be. So Ocean Protocol is a really good way that you can actually make your data available, set the access controls so that you can tell who should be accessing it, what types of terms they have. Also, being able to transparently track with blockchain who's accessed what. And then lastly, being able to use these things together to create a marketplace. So almost how you can like post a product on Amazon and be able to buy it, you can similarly post a data asset and make it available to folks who want to access that piece of information. And for our use case, that's really helpful because when you combine these things together, it means that we can start sharing data across borders way easier and also leveraging data sets outside of our own to build our models a little bit stronger. Because you're never going to have one data set that solves everything in the world. So kind of the close up, we also wanted to share a few best practices for scaling AI for good and also talking about scale. For us, we define sustainable scale as sustainable meaning that someone wants it and they're willing to pay for it, not just that like a government wanted it one time and then it's finished. And scale being multiple countries deployed over time. So what we found actually was that the best way to move fast was to go really slow and take a really, really targeted approach. I'm the first one to call out that we didn't cure cancer with this program. We focused on just finding observational things that help with sanitation issues. And in the course of doing that, we can really, really narrow on a specific challenge statement and then start to build and expand from there. Then likewise, having really measured sprints where we can design something, release it, create the second version in the case of Domestos in Vietnam, gather their feedback, create the third version, as is the case in our scale, and treat the process as a more incremental and never-ending build phase rather than a delivered, we've solved everything type of approach. And then obviously, lastly, having good partners. A lot of this came because partners were able to come together, work effectively, and actually identify where this would be of commercial value rather than just saying off the shelf, I got this image recognition thing, who wants it? Working with folks and actually mapping out where this goes from point A to point B to point C was super helpful. So yeah, that's kind of how we approach this project. And now I'd love to actually hand this over to Hugh from Microsoft to actually show you how image recognition can work and hopefully sort of demystify it so that it's not just a buzzword, but you can actually see how easy it would be to pick up on your own, apply to things, sanitation or otherwise, that could be useful for you, and kind of go from there. So thanks very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hugh. I'm from Microsoft. I focus on app innovation. So essentially, I help clients and partners to actually develop web app and mobile app, and to be able to deploy them to the App Store and have a connectivity to Azure. So essentially, my focus would be the web application as well as iOS and Android, and also used to be universal Windows platform that you'll be able to connect to our backend that actually hosted on Azure, and how to make all of that gel together and deliver a 5-star experience app. Right. So essentially, today I'm gonna tell you how you can actually build an AI. So can I have a show of hand who is actually here a developer? Okay, so a good 1/20 of the audience. But so here my focus is on actually all of you. So essentially, in order to build AI, it's not actually that, it may be intimidating to build, for example, the data set, and then having to build an ML model to actually, get trained from that data set, and all of that efforts to finally have a model and then actually apply it on your application to recognize instantly, what is going on, what are the insights inside of a certain image or a certain data, right? So at Microsoft, then what we actually have is a thing called cognitive services. So cognitive services are a range of API as a service. So for example, we have an API where you give it a pictures, and then we give you back a collection of text of what's inside the picture. So if I take a picture of you guys right now, then it's gonna be a crowd and a presentation, or kind of 50% Asian, and the rest are kind of some insight into the picture. And also, we have other kind of API. For example, we have speech, language, knowledge, and search. So with speech, then we also provide like recognition and being able to identify who is speaking and what was spoken, and also in order to use that to provide this kind of virtual assistant type of application where you could white label the whole application and be able to talk to the virtual assistant and know what's going on. So apart from that, then we also have some other API where you could also do a search, not only on text, but also on a video or on audio. So imagine that you have all this data that's reside inside a media format type of files, and with Azure Search, for example, then it utilizes the vision, the speech, and many other video indexer API, where it would, for example, if I were to search for Oliver, then it would not only return the documents that have the name Oliver on it, but it also will return the audios and the videos where Oliver actually was included in that assets, and then really to tell what part Oliver actually spoke about. So with these, then we really bridge the gap between being able to produce an AI application where we already built all of these models. You just go and call the API and then have that all ready in your application, right? So now I'm gonna show you an example that I built for an iOS app. So essentially, I'm gonna open up my QuickTime. So I already got it here. Okay. So essentially, what I built is a Xcode app. So essentially, it's a bit small. So it's an Xcode app that actually, or it's an iOS app that actually talks to one service that's called Custom Vision. So what's Custom Vision API is, it's for object detection. So if I give it a certain object and then I, define it, for example, as, a clicker, right? I would define that object and then take a sample 5 pictures of that object as the training data. And then I give it to Custom Vision, and then Custom Vision gonna give me back an AI model. So I'm gonna use that AI model, which is, a .ml model, and then I'm gonna apply it, with the name of that ML model inside, using the CoreML SDK that is provided. So if you were to do that on an Android, then there will be a TensorFlow SDK. And if you do that on a website, then there will be, Onyx SDK. So with that, then, I could take 5 pictures of anything and then, define that what's that object, and then I'll be able to download the AI model and then be able to recognize it offline, right? So I'm gonna do an actual demo on a Domestos model. So I'm gonna take sample pictures of that. So as you can see, I have already trained a couple of objects that you can actually see in the portal right here. So these are the training images, right? So for example, if I were to click into Bandage, then it will show me what are the training data. If I click into a first aid kit, then it will show me what was the training data. And then with this, then I'll just trigger the train, and then it will produce back an AI model. So you can go to customvision.ai to build your own AI or your own object recognition model. So in here, I built 6. I'll add another one that I'll call it Domestos. So initially, I actually built this for a supermarket type of scenario, where you could actually go and recognize, different items in a supermarket, and then be instantly know what was the price for it and what's the inventory. So in this scenario, then the price there is just for reference. So you can actually save this and then go to Domestos, go to images, and then actually upload the few training data, right? So I'm gonna take it from different angles to really have my model be resilient. And yeah, so the spinning wheel is kind of, a process for it to upload to Custom Vision. And from that, I'll trigger the training and then download the ML model.
So while it's training, there's actually a couple different reasons why you would use photo recognition, and especially in a for good context. So for example, training a model for merchandisers in a store or in a pharmacy especially, to see what types of first care products are available in last mile communities, understanding what types of assets are in those communities in the first place. Image and object recognition is often used maybe as an easy way for providing a way for someone in a local community to submit a photo of what they see, and for someone maybe further along to actually tell them or tell a community leader what is being recognized. Same is true in logistics, and likewise in kind of speech AI. There's a lot of similar types of BOP or base of the pyramid use cases that we can talk about as well, hopefully during the panel.
So I've triggered the training of the project, and essentially it's waiting for the training to be done. As you see, online it says training. If you see my previous training, then it also provides you with a precision, recall, and AP type of percentage. So if you have more sample, then this would be more accurate. But as you can see, it's already done training. It's downloading, and it got the latest ML model file. So what I can do is I can click here and then go and recognize Domestos, right? So the great thing about this is that there is recognizing it offline. There's no communicating to Azure from this point on. So it's already, downloaded. You can run it anywhere. And the more important thing is the latency. So I could actually change this. I could actually change this to a different product. For example, Lifebuoy. It says 265. I change it to a bandage. Yep, bandage. And then I could change it to so no, I lost that soap. But yeah. Yeah. But you know what I mean. So essentially, we built this AI model not only for you to call from an API, because let's face it, sometimes latency to Azure and then having to check every picture is going to take a long time. Where all of our API, we are actually initiating. We already moved a number of them to a container. So what that means is that you can download a container and then deploy it either to your own machine or on your own data center. So in those scenarios, for example, you have a Raspberry Pi or you have a Juno, then you can download the ML model that I have here, or for example, Luis, our natural language processing API can be downloaded on-prem as well, or many other speech and vision that you can download on-prem to really provide this real-time analysis of the camera feed or anything that you have on-prem without communicating to Azure. And that we are the first one to do it among any of the cloud providers to really provide the kinds of services, AI APIs, to be available at the top of the container and ML, Core ML and TensorFlow model, right? So I hope this inspires you to go and build your own, and then really save you a lot of time to get your AI app going. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we're going to have a panel. And I'm sure I'll get a microphone. Okay, where are we all? Yes, this is number 2. Lloyd Tarnock from Azure Microsoft. Kuseng Meng, Deputy Director AI Singapore. Oliver, you've met. I'm Adam Lyle. I'm the co-founder of Pardani, which manages the Space Level 3 with Unilever. So, we've got microphones. Yes, it's all working. Alive. So what we're going to do now is just have a bit of a general chat, trying not to be too much of the sort of the panel that we've all seen and perhaps got a bit tired of. So we'll have a conversation amongst ourselves for the next 15, 20 minutes, and then we'd very much like to open the floor to you folks. And then most importantly, then we'll go and have a drink and hopefully something to eat where you can network and actually ask all those questions that you don't want to ask in public. So that's kind of the process over the next 30 minutes or so. So let's go. Actually, where's Hugh gone? I think doing a live demo actually really does need another round of applause, and sort of creating something like that is really terrific to take that on. Every time you say you're going to do it, and then it doesn't always come out right. But I think that was great just to see what can be done, the enormous potential. Seng Meng, you as Deputy Director of AI Singapore, I mean, everybody I'm sure is aware of AI Singapore. It's basically Singapore's AI, how would you describe it? Well, I mean, everybody's involved. It's its grandfather, if you like, is the NRF, the National Research Foundation, EDB's involved, SG Innovate, IMDA, who else? IHIS is involved, isn't it? Involved. Who else should I be mentioning? Smart Nation Office?
Smart Nation Digital Government Office.
Right.
Basically, every government agency that wants to think about how to use AI to harness and advance their national agenda.
So it's kind of the powerhouse for Singapore and establishing Singapore's leadership in this space. And it's kind of, its mandate is around building capabilities, which obviously very important because Singapore wants to be a hub in this space. Also looking at the challenges. We all know there's lots of challenges with AI. So I guess we've got to build the capabilities, we've got to understand the challenges, and at the same time then get out there like you're doing tonight in a way and sort of talking about use cases. How do we get people to adopt AI in greater paces? Is that, if I sort of describe the mandate of AI Singapore?
Perfectly.
Okay. Now, from your point of view, when you're looking at something like AI for good, now there is a sense, and sometimes people are a bit cynical because there are lots of AI for good type programs out there, and I absolutely sign up for it in a big way. I think it's fantastic. But what's your take on AI for good? From AI Singapore, how do you see AI for good?
Well, for us, AI for good means empowering the Singapore citizens, empowering people working and living in Singapore to take advantage of what AI can do for you, to take advantage of what AI can improve your lives, can improve the way you work, can free up more time for you instead of doing all those mundane, repetitive stuff, do more meaningful work, and basically thrive in this coming of age of AI.
Absolutely, but can you sort of dive a little bit deeper? How might you paint that for the man in the street? What might that actually look like? Here in 2019, obviously we can all talk about what it might be in 2030, 2050, what it might be doing, but sort of here and now, 2019, or perhaps just over the next couple of years, AI for good. What's the kind of good that you see in the near term?
So let me paint some personal aspiration from my side. In 10 years' time, I mean, the world is changing, jobs are changing, all that. I mean, for us, is what do you want to do? Do you want to do more higher value stuff? Do you want to free up more time? So if you want me to paint concrete examples, will be, I mean, I have a personal AI. I guess everybody watched Iron Man. I have a personal AI. I have a personal Jarvis to take care of all the little things that I want to do. There's this wonderful Amazon Alexa app that says that you're a daily companion, helping you to call the cab, helping you to check the weather, all that. So being able to build AI tools that allow companies to sell their product better, being able to build AI tools that allow the individuals to enjoy and having more times for themselves. I guess that's one of the key things that we want to look at. And of course, the government is always very interested to look at new technology and what does that mean for them. So they need to be in the driver's seat to understand how AI will impact businesses, how AI will impact their individuals so that they can tailor their policies better to maximize their potential. Yeah.
Okay, listen, I'll pick up on that a little bit later because I think Oliver's slide was great, sort of good AI versus AI for good. And we'll sort of loop back on that because I do think it's very important to distinguish between, are we talking about optimization of our businesses using AI to optimize existing business, which is perfectly valid, but at the same time, how can we be very specific about what we want to do with AI and chase real big problems that AI can help us with? But just kind of skipping in order, Laura, in terms of sort of Microsoft's sort of take on this, how do you guys come to it? Your particular focus areas when you're thinking about AI for good, there are so many areas you can be looking at, but how do you sort of size it up, or do you have specific areas you're interested in?
Yeah, so Microsoft has specific programs around AI for good, and we actually categorize it into different areas. So we have AI for Earth, so you can imagine, for example, AI around natural resources or around citizen science looking at endangered species, and so we have a specific program around that. AI for accessibility, and I think Oliver spoke a little bit about how you could start thinking about tools for helping people who are not literate or not digitally literate. So that's accessibility. And then AI for humanitarian action, where we look at, for example, natural disaster prediction and response. So those are the categories Microsoft looked at. We're sort of broader in the application here when we look at sanitation and health, right?
Yeah, how did you come to those sort of big, broad buckets? Is there a particular theme running through there, or just a grouping, was brainstorming somewhere and they thought, hey, let's look at the earth, let's look at accessibility?
So it's a good question, right? So Microsoft has a philanthropies department who are actually represented here tonight, who determine sort of how we invest in these areas, right? And looking at what needs they have. But I would say it doesn't preclude us from looking more broadly across AI where good occurs, right? In, for example, commercial health applications as well, right?
And what about some of those commercial health applications? What do you think perhaps we should be looking at there? Are there specific sort of wish lists that you have?
I have a wish list. I mean, toilets, of course, is on top of my wish list.
We all love toilets, don't we? Love toilets.
Right?
Look how many people came out tonight for toilets. Let's give it up for toilets. It's very interesting. Whenever we talk about sanitation, we seem to get a lot of people. Yet we don't like talking about toilets or poo or wee, but we hold an event and people come out for it. Jack Sim, who I'm sure many of you know, created World Toilet Day. Thanks to Jack Sim, who then, through the Singapore government, petitioned the UN, so we now have World Toilet Day, which again is an amazing Singapore innovation. But I digress. I'm sorry. Back to you, Laura.
I can digress on toilets too. So yeah, if you look at healthcare in general, beyond sanitation, so I love sanitation because it is healthcare advancement that affects the livelihood of a lot of people without having to require medical professionals or medical equipment, right? Sustainable Development Goal number 6, water and hygiene, diarrheal diseases killing lots of people, right? So there's a lot of applicability across hygiene and sanitation, but then if you look into health more broadly, sort of three main areas. One, you see it on the news, is diagnostics, right? How do we use AI to improve the efficiency of imaging diagnostics, right? Fixing cancer diagnosis, for example. I think there's a lot of applicability there. The other one that I really like is epidemiology. So how do we look at the data that we know, which is limited, around emerging disease threats, swine flu, some of the coronaviruses, for example, and use that to predict and manage, for example, what's going to happen with, in rural China, for example. And then the third area, I think, around healthcare and AI is clinical process, right? So how do we take the realm of medical error, which we know costs thousands of lives annually, maybe more than that, and, use an AI tool of some sort to highlight where medical errors might be occurring, where processes around sanitation in the medical facilities aren't happening, for example.
Okay, listen, I want to come back and sort of perhaps dive into a little bit of why we're not doing more quickly there. But perhaps to Oliver, where did you sort of feel the, if I want to play the cynical guy, we've had greenwashing, now we've got AI washing, AI for good washing. How real is AI for good versus organisations sort of running campaigns? And I'm not talking about Unilever, absolutely not, but organisations trying to sort of put up a good game, but it's not real. Where's the real potential? And basically, firstly, is it real? And how do we get rid of the cynics? How do we stop the cynics?
Yeah, so I think at a basic level, AI is real. I think a lot of people in this room would agree that in different forms it is definitely real. In terms of kind of the greenwashing comment, sure. It's also easy to, as with many tech buzzwords, to throw AI in front of anything and throw blockchain in front of anything, and suddenly you have a seed round. But yeah, so it's definitely possible. How you avoid that and how you actually expand AI for good, I think, is to be really practical, to focus on something that is very specific, that's very tangible in real terms and in a short period of time, so that people can actually use it and then build on top of it. Everyone likes the idea of driverless cars, but if you gave me literally $1 trillion, I would have no idea how to build a driverless car. Whereas, you know, the image recognition that we just saw from Hugh, I could probably figure that out next week, maybe 2 weeks, even though it looks pretty simple. And then that's probably a really good building block to start building kind of these incremental steps towards the big pictures of, you know, just commercial AI or AI for good that we're talking about today.
Yeah. And maybe to all three of you, so I'll jump to you, Xingming. Just on that case, what's actually stopping us getting to more practical? You know, Laura talked about a whole bunch of potential use cases of, you know, there's so much information out there that we could be utilizing AI for to sort of go through and look for particular solutions and help us do things more quickly. Why are we not seeing greater results? Or are we seeing the results and we're just not aware of them, we're not talking it up?
I guess it's a lot of advancement in AI are being pushed by organization, commercial entities. But commercial entities or organizations, they are made out of people. So these people are the, when you talk about embracing AI, there's always this narrative that's going on in the media to talk about AI is taking away jobs or that. That is actually one factor where the end beneficiaries is not seeing the benefits as the company push for AI or for automation. That could be one area that is stopping. While media reports about AI doing amazing things, you don't see that percolating that much down. Yeah.
So we all think perhaps where the media is scaring people more than enthusing? No, whatever that word is, you know what I'm trying to say, exciting people about the possibilities of AI. Do we think the media is scaring people more unnecessarily? Oliver, go for it. Well, Laura, you've got the talking stick, go for it.
Well, I was going to say, I'm not sure it's only a media thing. No. I think if you look at, for example, take the internet in 1995, it was a beautiful system and nobody knew how to use it, right? I think AI today, we're maybe 96, 97, right? Where the internet has changed everyone's lives. I don't think we've developed the models both commercially and just raw idea-wise that enables us to progress to your point as far as we would like to be with AI. I think that's the process that we're on, and that's maybe something part of tonight as well, right? Like this is a business area that's in search of ideas and a great opportunity for young, clever minds, right?
So again, do you think the technology, the capability and the potential of the technology is still looking for problems to solve in some cases?
And commercial models to solve those problems, yeah.
Are there particular models, Oliver, that you're seeing or problems that you're seeing that just aren't being solved and you feel that AI could come in and play a very big role in solving them? Apart from toilets.
It's a pretty broad brief. Yeah, so I think just as Laura mentioned the example of internet in the 90s, you know, we are sitting in Singapore talking about AI, and there's still a very significant portion of the world that doesn't have internet yet. And that digital divide is only going to get accelerated as we continue to talk about AI and build on AI and, you know, create all these great use cases. But then, you know, in emerging markets where our company has a little bit more forte, we definitely see that firsthand, where, you know, people are being left out. And hopefully, you know, I think in that context, examples like speech recognition, where someone who maybe doesn't have traditional literacy, as Laura mentioned before, traditional literacy or digital literacy, comfort using a phone. If you can talk into your device and suddenly be as proficient as someone who's been, you know, digitally native since you were 6, that's a pretty big step up. And it's not going to solve everything, but, you know, that's a really, really clear use case to me where speech is way better than just like, Alexa, play this song. Like that use case is kind of stupid to me compared to what you could be doing with it. And I think the same is true for education, same is true for a lot of other government services that maybe aren't being addressed, but that's a good starting point for now.
And perhaps, well, again, similar question asked a different way. What are some of the hurdles that you all see, Laura or Xingming, in terms of what is slowing adoption? Because I guess we all know that to have AI, we have to have data to train models. And it's still this elusive thing. We all know we're creating more data yesterday than we've created in the last X hundred years kind of things, but it's not necessarily available. How can we get more access to data to enable the process? What's missing to facilitate the data?
Yeah, so earlier in the talk we talked about Ocean. They're one of many technologies that helps to bring forward data and unlock value from data. I think that's kind of a starting point because instinctually you see all this data that big companies have, or as a company, companies don't want to just give up their information for nothing, and for risk reasons, for fear of losing out on an asset that you have. It's not clear yet how you unlock value from it. But as I mentioned, there's no one single perfect data set. So there's really going to have to be a change of mindset where, how do you layer and blend assets together rather than just, focus on one Excel spreadsheet. And until we have kind of more sharing and transparency about what could be available and how do we access these things in a fair way, and importantly, how do someone who's creating data share fair value from that, I think we need to kind of break past that roadblock to get to the core that you're talking about.
Sengming, from AI Singapore's point of view, what do you think we need to do?
We do agree with that. In fact, AI Singapore partners with Ocean to fund research into data tokenization, because I think there's also another trend going on as big companies realize the value of data and data that you are unconsciously just giving it to them. There's reaching an inflection point that actually the general consumers or the man on the street realize that my data is valuable. Why am I giving away my wealth to other people? So data tokenization is going to be a big way to equalize the sharing of wealth that is being generated by all this advancement of AI. But having said that, that's more of a consumer side of things. There are still certain areas in terms of where data sharing could be quite problematic or in fact quite dangerous because it can build prejudices. For example, while Singapore has this HIV case or that, all this kind of data is being exposed. I mean, the best technology when it comes to data storage and cybersecurity is always on keeping step with hackers or that. It's going to be an ongoing thing. So that these are all the narratives that possibly, as we look at advancing data, advancing AI, data being the field, we probably need to solve what exactly does it mean to be having fair data sharing. What are data that is good and what are data that should not be out on the street?
And I think to answer part of your original question, what are some of the challenges? Making sure that safety, security, and also government regulation keeps pace with the revolution that we're seeing in both data and AI is, in a way, a regulating factor to how fast we can innovate, right? Or how fast we can innovate for good.
Well, yeah, and it's pretty tough for government to keep up with the innovators, not trying to put government on the spot, but things are happening so fast. It's a real challenge. I can keep asking questions, but I'd actually like to give the floor an opportunity to ask some questions. And we'll have a roving mic. There's a gentleman in the second row. And I'm going to hand the microphone to him.
Hi, I actually have two questions.
Just say your name and where you're from.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Raymond. I'm actually from Chok. So just a quick question, two questions basically. So the first question is, in terms of impact measures, because that's kind of the way generally the nonprofits measure performance of a social program. I'm just wondering how effective, for example, your particular AI project is. And on a more broader question will be in terms of AI impact of AI. One of the things that really affects society in general is the fact that many marginal communities are out in the rural areas without access to infrastructure, for example, the internet. So I'm just wondering, what is how can you actually impact these groups of individuals? Because, for example, the World Toilet Organization actually deals primarily with rural areas to provide sanitation, and that seems to be a very tough problem for AI to approach.
Who'd like to take that?
Sounds like maybe Laura.
The next question, if you nominate who you'd like to answer the question.
I'm going to start and then I'm going to hand it over to Oliver. So if you look at impact of sanitation specifically, right? $1 in improved sanitation water generally returns $4.3, $4.30 in reduced healthcare costs, just based on reduction of diarrheal diseases, right? That's a general measure. Measuring a specific project like this is much harder to do, obviously, because we don't have the wide global data sets, right? And then you'll follow up.
Yeah, thank you. And good question on both counts. So, for speaking to the impact of our own initial pilot, so yeah, I mean, the program that we launched with the Thai government, that one reached about 4 provinces, wasn't intended to be reaching every single toilet in those provinces, but was more of a proof of concept of how this could work when you scale it. And then with that in mind, the kind of measurements of kind of cost per reach is quite good, especially now that that's scaling and considering it a platform rather than a cost per collect to each toilet. I'm not sure what baseline metric you'd want, but we know that from a commercial perspective, it's quite sustainable compared to previous models and definitely achieves the sanitation goals it's designed. So I can measure it in per toilets reached, things like that. But yeah, so I'll put a kind of pin in that. Then in the second question that you had was more about how do you do Yeah, sure. So everything that we did, the tool itself works online, offline, meaning that you can collect data offline, upload it later as soon as you do connect to the internet. And then at that point, we would be able to integrate it into the model and pass information back to the stakeholders that are overseeing that area. And that in itself is unique to our platform. There's a couple other offline platforms that do similar types of data collection. But the big theme that I think you're getting at is that we need, again, just to not be a broken record, but we need really practical ways to help people take the first step in this digital divide that we're talking about. And if taking a photo is that first step, it seems pretty easy. And it's also pretty aligned with existing hardware that's already in the market, even on feature phones, a lot of kind of Android-based feature phones, not quite smartphones, but they still have a camera. That's a really easy entry point to use. And especially if you're training people how it works over time, we think that's a little bit more practical than like long skills trainings programs, although those are important, but this is just more tangible.
Okay, I've got one over here.
Sure. Hi, thank you very much. My name is Raj. I'm a senior project manager from Exito, so I'm more focused on the operations and the commercial side. So again, a slightly two-part question, but probably both of them related. What were the challenges that you faced in terms of the data collection aspect of it? That's something that I'm always very curious to understand. Okay, having said, it's great, it's fantastic to hear about this, but in terms of on ground, what were some of the challenges that we faced, that you faced, both from a from a technology perspective, but also from a sort of a stakeholder management perspective, if you will. And following that, I think one of the great questions that came up was that what were some of the commercial models that came up that could be looked into that? So do you think this whole data collection for AI could be a great employment opportunity for for communities that are there in the rural areas? And have you thought about how do we sort of get that going so that it doesn't come into a garbage in, garbage out sort of a situation? Thank you.
Thanks, Raj.
So I think I can take the first part. So what were some of the challenges that we faced in data collection, both technically and non-technically, right? So the first one we faced actually was, what is our metric? What are we measuring? What's a good toilet? What's a bad toilet? How do you find a baseline for that? How do you teach a model about that? Can a model recognize a dirty toilet? Yes, as long as the dirt's brown, right? And not if the dirt's bacterial. So we spent a fair bit of time figuring out what those metrics were, and with a partnership with the Ministry of Public Health, actually added in the accessibility metrics, which we hadn't been focusing on originally. It was about hygiene and sanitation, and added in, you know, guardrails, accessibility, alarm buttons, et cetera, to really broaden what that looks like, right? So is that the perfect model? No, it still has challenges, right? Until we have in-phone bacteria sensors, it's not going to be the perfect model. Technically, relatively smooth. A few hiccups, just making sure that we had everybody on a version of Android that was working with the model. We built the model with Android, as opposed to with iOS, just on the vision that was a more accessible platform, right? Not for any, you know, political reason, but so keeping that aligned and making sure that everyone was acting consistently and following the same model was the second challenge. And then I'd say the third one, and I know, Oliver, this is something you see in other programs, is training and scaling, right? So how, you know, it's great to do it in one location, but how do you, to your point, move out into rural communities and get effectively trainers who are training people on using the model and scaling the model? And then do you want to take the second question?
Yeah, sure. So your second question was about, do we see a commercial model for data collection? 1,000,000%. Yeah. In fact, that's probably one of the greatest digital opportunities for folks in these areas, because, again, the tools exist, they're accessible, they're easy to train on. The inputs that they would be collecting are often missing from the market. So it's not like you're just doing it and you're hoping that it's competitive, but you are the first data creator in an area that doesn't have data, a quote-unquote data dark area. So rather than treating that person as kind of like the most downstream recipient of a product, we can treat them as like the most upstream information source. And I think that changes dynamics and hopefully more inclusively shares direct financial value in the things that we are creating.
So AI for good is good business, is where that's going, right?
That's right.
Now, there was a gentleman over here, I think in the front row, had a question.
My name's Shab. I'm an independent consultant. I have a question about transparency, I guess, from both sides. So, Sang-Mang, from your point as a representative of the government, and you guys as service providers. So, my question's around, if you are doing a project like this, for example, in Thailand, let's say you have a benevolent government in one sense who does want to provide sanitation and, you know, wants to do it in as transparent a way as possible. What happens when you have a government that might not be as transparent? An example could be India. You have a Swachh Bharat initiative. Numbers around it have been very speculative at best. You have the government saying one thing, NGOs saying another, and their KPI targets for sanitation are severely mismatched. Now, as a government, how do you set measurements where, one, even if you're misaligned with, let's say, oh, as a political party, yeah, sure, I want to say we did everything well, when the facts might say something else. On the other hand, as a data provider, as a service provider, as a technology assistant, how do you ensure that your AI for good isn't just good for a political party or a government, but it actually is good for the people?
I'll let you have a go. I need more time to think about this.
I will take a non-governmental response to this. So I'd say, I think we talked about partnership, right? And I think you need to establish a partnership model that is mutually beneficial. And it doesn't have to be with government. And in fact, maybe it isn't most sustainable if it's with government, right? For some of the reasons you mentioned, also for the fact that you might not have the right monetary flows to sustain the project, right? So if we look at the sanitation example specifically, Oliver talked about how we're expanding into schools in Vietnam and several other countries with Unilever, right? So based on now looking at product and sanitation together, and that's the partnership, right? So this isn't it's not specifically a governmental initiative. It's not, rebelling against the government either, but it's a different partnership model. So I think flexibility in partnership models is the way to get around misaligned goals. And I think, it's probably not worth having a sanitation program if you can't align the goals in that way. Do you want to add from the Singapore perspective? Benevolent.
We didn't really concentrate on toilets and sanitation here, but if I try to address the gentleman's point about whether the government is manipulating data, is that what you're trying to ask?
Transparency, right? If I'm
Yeah.
why should I believe Microsoft or NetBelieve or Singapore government? If you tell me there aren't these toilets, why should I believe you if that data is not available to everybody?
Yeah.
If it is, how do I verify it's true?
Yeah. So here's the thing, the government attempts, at least in Singapore, I can speak for Singapore, is the government wants to publish as many data out to the public, even such to a point where there is a government portal, data.gov.sg. So this is where they try to be, I mean, the government tried to be transparent to say, here's the data, raw and pure. So the interpretation of the data is actually the one that could be more problematic than the raw data itself, because taking parts of the data to train, in fact, is one of the things that the research pillar of our program office is trying to look at, as in, how do you explain how an AI model arrives at a decision? I think it goes, I'll take a tangential to say that taking the data as itself, same sets of data, you can train two different models and you can arrive at two different outcome. So instead of debating whether the data is real or not, I think efforts need to be made to say that, how do you understand whether the model is being trained correctly? Garbage in, garbage out. There is also a risk of biasness that's being built in. So if we go back to collection of the data, sometimes the data itself could be biased. In fact, when we talk about computer vision itself is actually racist. Because computer vision can do feature extraction for light skin tones, which is pretty easy, but they can't do that very well for dark skin tone people. And in fact, most of the advances of computer vision is actually based on Caucasian data sets. So if I throw the question back at you, is it the data's fault? Or is it whether the government is hiding anything? In this case, I'm just publishing all the data out there. I'm not too sure whether I actually answered the question, but if I summarize, from Singapore government perspective, there's nothing to hide. All the data is put out there.
Well, I think it's about we got to believe. Now, there was a gentleman up the back with the blue shirt I'm coming towards. Very lean operation here. It's a one-man show. There you go.
Hello there. My name is Barry from a company called Reterms, and I'm going to take on Adam's point about the cynicism and the scaremongering. I mean, a couple of things that I've heard today about AI means that it's such a broad definition that people don't understand what element you're talking about. I've heard stuff about analytics, I've heard stuff about machine learning, and I've heard stuff about what I interpret AI to be. So there's that element of it. Then there's the other element of it that says, actually AI doesn't get rid of jobs. It's people employing AI and not figuring out the consequences, whether it's redeployment or cost productivity or just cutting. You got any views on that, please?
Boy, that's a simple one, Barry. Who wants to take that?
I can take the second part. I'll generously share the first part. So during the Industrial Revolution, everyone thought machines were going to take their jobs, right? I think that, and what happened during the Industrial Revolution was that we saw tremendous economic growth through the driving of improved efficiency in every walk of life in industrial areas, right? I think that's the way that we are looking at this for AI and for the technologies that you mentioned, right? Will it change the way we do business? Absolutely. Did the internet change the way we do business? Absolutely. Will that affect some people's jobs? Ask a bank teller who was working in 1995 when ATMs came out, right? Yes, some jobs will change, right? As they continue to have done over many decades and, millennia. Will that result in a net reduction of jobs? I think we know that we're uncovering new employment areas every day, right? And that's why I talk about that whole ideation that we need and that will drive more revolution in areas around AI. which will create new business models and new jobs, right? So that's the way I look at it from the employment perspective. Who wants to take the other part?
Well, and also just the merging of all these notions. I mean, at times people say AI, but actually you're talking about robotics or automation on a simple level, and people throw everything into AI. Well, it's not exactly. Let's sort of focus on what it is. And I think there's a danger. And yeah. So I do think it's a matter of, you know, what are we really talking about? And calling people out when they say, you know, AI, you know, this is AI. I said, well, really? You know, show me where the AI is. I mean, I don't know how many pictures I've seen over the last year, and people say, oh, we're going to solve that with AI. And I go, really? Where is it? Oh, well, you know, we got the... And people are falling into the trap of it's just another thing. As Oliver was saying before, blockchain. Oh, you know, we've got this blockchain solution for X. So there's a bit of the baffle and babble, the B&B. But you illustrious people who are more learned than I, do you have a point of view on that, Sing-Ming?
About AI and jobs?
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got a view on that, but you have to be careful, you know, which line you walk. I don't want to put you on the spot. You don't have to answer the question.
We had a conversation earlier before. We always get questions from the audience to say, why is government putting in money to develop AI when it's going to take away jobs? But if you look at it, AI, from me as a technical perspective, AI is automating tasks. If your job consists of nothing but tasks, you really don't need AI to make you obsolete. I mean, the passage of time, the advancement of general technologies will make the job generally obsolete itself. So I like the example you talk about the bank, because it's also one of the slides that we usually show in our seminar itself. Two companies, both banking companies. One company decide to adopt AI and actually fire away all the tellers. In Singapore, OCBC automates as much as possible and decided to reskill and retrain all the tellers to do other things. They become digital concierge, all that. So end of the day, it's not for, we shouldn't be pointing our finger at AI. We should be pointing our finger at the management of the companies that is adopting this solution, be it AI, be it mixed reality, be it blockchain, or any other new fancy terms that can generate seed rounds. As in, how do you actually adopt all these things, and which is then central to AI for good? What is AI for good? And that is something worth another talk.
Well, I think, is there a last question, and then we might go to drinks, and everybody can ask everyone questions. Okay, you had your hand up before. And also, what would be really great, just before we take this question, how many people in the room consider that they actually work in AI? It's not going to be your title, but how many people actually are practitioners or in the area of working in AI? Okay, so quite a good spread. Last question from me. How many of you have an idea where you think you could apply AI for good? Particular use case you've been tossing around, just thinking about? Strong, come on, yeah. So there's a lot of good in the room. That's great to know. So we'd like to hear, when we go to the break and the networking, sort of beat up on these guys, come up and talk about the ideas you have, because the only way we're going to get scale of these things is if we do get together and talk about it. Now, over to you. I found out where you are.
Hello, so my name is Ying Hui, and then I'm working in an AI company in Shanghai for the past 3 years. So I'd like to share a bit about my Chinese experience with regards to AI specifically. So I'd like you guys to imagine doing a Google search and versus doing, let's say, a Baidu search or Baidu or Yahoo search. So Google is a lot superior because of how intuitive the search is. So like when you type Apple, they will give you like a technology company instead of the fruit. So that by itself, like knowing, so here Google is doing a lot of like AI by analyzing all your data, where you go, and then your search, and then have a profile before it give you a result of what's intuitive to you. So this is just to give an illustration of how intuitive big data can power AI. So I like to share my Chinese experience is because there are the Chinese companies, like for example, the Chinese equivalent of GrabFood, it's called Ele.me in China. So like it use big data to understand, like for example, when it's raining, and then like also the consumer would prefer to eat like porridge. So it would drive like different data points to give more intuitive recommendations. Then there are services like mobile that it's arise from China as well, where you can track, okay, consumers, the users, their daily routine, and so on. So like I'm giving all these examples, it's because like these companies are bought over by Alibaba, by Baidu, and what's the T? Tencent. So and then I'm trying to break the context, right? So what I'm trying to say is like these services, they use like big data and then to make life really, really convenient, but they are owned by very big tech companies, and these tech companies, they are CCP members as well. So to be on the previous gentleman's questions using political systems, so all these are CCP members. So if they and they are in fact using all this data from different holistic way of the daily interaction, consolidated in these few companies, also controlled by the government regulations. So they also have like Zhima credit. So if you own your debt, and then so your credit will go lower. But if you always pay your right, so there is a social score. It's already working. Right. So this actually regulates the society. So people are less likely to commit. So there's a social regulation right there. So in reference to your previous question, if government can use this for good, yes, there's a self-regulating system right there. So my question would be, like, how do we? So it's not so much about like whether the government can use this for good, because there are many ways. With this context, you can do a lot creepy stuff with it. My idea of AI for good is then how, in the Singapore context, we do not have this very consolidated system. So for example, the financial system, PayLah, PayNow, but then most people are using cash, so you don't get that very dense data. And then, so in terms of the power of AI, it's not going to be as powerful. So we can't compete economically with, for example, China. But then we also don't have.
So are you talking? So I guess what you're trying to ask is, what is Singapore doing?
So therefore, with regards to the AI for good, how do we balance that economy advantage versus like, do we really want that system of society where everything's governed by data?
Sure. So Singapore is very pragmatic. I mean, AI Singapore is using taxpayer money, so there's definitely KPIs attached to it to maximize the return. In fact, one of the KPIs that we want to look at is about general increase in GDPs, etc. So those are economic factors that we will factor in to guide all of our activities itself, so that there is some form of AI for good percolated to the government, percolated to the industries, and percolated to the individuals. Yeah, I can share with you more of what our program office does.
Right. This gentleman here will be the last response, and then we'll go to the next person.
All right. My name is Liu. I'm a teacher. Right. Years ago, I studied a little bit about knowledge engineering. So the last two members of the floor, right, mentioned things like what is AI, and the lady just told us quite a bit about China and rules, some rules and whatever they have discovered about knowledge. Okay, my question was, in the past, right, we had this thing called business rules. I believe that I think quite a lot of things were being said. But now the word is called data sets. So is there any connection? I mean, AI, business rules, how companies get the information as to like when it rains, what are customers more likely to buy, so you push them out. All these are rules. Are they now all hidden as black boxes in data sets? Or is there any way that actually something readable, humanly readable, so that businesses or companies can decide to buy the so-called data sets that are meaningful, that are logical, that can be tested, against common sense?
Well, the short answer is yes, and there's a very much longer answer to go into the particular details of each circumstance.
Yeah. So why is it that now we all call everything data sets?
Wow. Well, it's a collective noun of data.
Because information and data are different. I think business rules and they are more like information. But now we are reducing everything to data sets. Is there a reason why?
Want to go with that?
I can't really comment on the semantics of data sets. I probably say data sets because other smart people say data sets, and I want to sound smart.
But obviously it's the core of what we're doing, and then we move into how you utilize those data sets to do things. And of course, yes, there are business rules around the interpretation and the utilization of those data sets. Then you get into the whole, the algorithms, how they're utilizing, and so it goes. So I don't think there's one short answer. But what I would like to do now is ask you all to show thanks to our panel for sort of taking the questions. I would also then like to invite you for drinks and nibbles. If anyone would like to know anything more about Level 3, please speak to me or speak to Upma or any of the Level 3 staff. If you want to come here, live here, please do so, or just work out of here. And any hard questions you want to ask the panel. And all those people who have got great ideas of AI for good, start talking to us. Let's gather them and let's take it forward. Thank you very much.